Welcome to the Techne Automotive podcast, aimed at inspiring the next generation of EE-related talent to choose a career within our space, whilst also supporting the current EE talent pool in making key career decisions. In each episode, we interview industry leaders to discuss their unique career paths, advice for those starting out in the automotive industry, as well as important issues currently impacting the sector. My name is Ferris, and I'm responsible for connecting automotive businesses to the best EE-related talent. Today, we are joined by Simon Duke from Saietta. Simon is a great example of how you can transition between multiple disciplines to achieve a very successful career. Starting out in the automotive industry slightly different to other guests, Simon began his career as a technician apprentice and later pivoted into mechanical design, where he was exposed to some world-class projects. He made a transition in his career whilst operating as a chief engineer, where he was mechanically biased, and he then pivoted into software and controls, and he provides us with some great insights into how he executed this successfully. In this episode, we'll discuss Simon's key achievements, some key advice that he shares with us, as well as his insights for the future of the automotive industry. Hi, Simon. First of all, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. Thursday afternoon, so it's not too bad. We're almost at the weekend. Absolutely.
Before we get started, do you want to just introduce yourself for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Simon Duke. I'm the head of engineering at a company called Saietta. So we produce electric drives for light utility vehicles.
Fantastic. And you've got a really interesting career that we're going to run through shortly. But before we get into your career, I suppose who's Simon outside of work?
Yeah, so this is always an interesting question because as an engineer, I tend to be quite busy outside of work with various different things. A few years ago, we bought a fixer-upper house, I think, is something that's occupied a lot of my time in recent years. So every year we seem to have a big project on the go. First of all, we had to go with a conservatory that we had a sort of single glazed greenhouse, I think, was probably a better description on the back of the house. So that had to go and be replaced. But as an engineer, obviously, I did most of the work myself and specified it and measured things and all of that good stuff. And then last year we renovated the kitchen, which required knocking a wall down and having a wheelbarrow in the kitchen, which was fairly serious. But, again, interested in doing the structural work to the house, having specifying a steel, getting that delivered, having to build it and various other things. So, yeah, keep fairly busy. Yeah.
Absolutely. That engineering brain's not turning off, is it?
No, I think it's one of those things that once you're into it, then you tend to want to understand the ins and outs of everything, and especially when you're sleeping above floor that you're just about to shore up with a bit of steel, you make sure that it's not going to fall down. So,
and a little bit of running in the spare time. I think last time we spoke.
Again, on years that I'm not demolishing half of the house, I tend to try and find some sort of challenge for myself. A few years ago, I did quite a long cycle ride up in Nottinghamshire, somewhere that was an off-road thing, which you tend to look at these things and think, well, I'll go for the longest part of the event. And yeah, that was quite painful by the end. And then this year I've decided to have another go at a half marathon, which was something I did about 15 years ago. And I think the memory's faded sufficiently now that I'll have another go. So we'll see how that goes.
Obviously, going through your career, it actually started, didn't it? The initial inspiration for your career was really starting to come up in secondary school. You talk through like a go-kart project.
I was lucky enough that I went to a grammar school in Aylesbury that was historically a technical college. And so we had things like mills and lathes and things actually in one of the technology rooms. So that was really good to have access to that sort of equipment at a young age. And we had quite a maverick DT teacher who was always signing up for various different extracurricular activities, one of which was something to do with the Rover Group, and they provided a go-kart, zip kart it was called at the time, that had a small Honda engine on the back. And every kind of term, I think it was, they would send some extra parts out. So at one point I can remember some mini metro rear lights turning up that needed to be sort of attached in some way to this go-kart. But I think the best bit about that was one evening he waited till all the other teachers went home and then let us all have a go around the school field, which was quite fun until one of the wheels fell off. So
yeah. I'm not sure you get away with that with health and safety these days.
No, I think it's probably not the thing to be done. Yes, so that was good. And then he also signed us up for doing the Shell Mileage Marathon, which still goes on today, where you try and make a car that does as many miles a gallon as possible. So we made a car again with a small sort of Honda lawnmower engine on the back. I think the chassis was a donated table that we got welded up locally, and the seat, a guard from a wheel balancing machine that somebody else donated. So but then we made the drive ourselves, and we got 250 odd miles to the gallon from memory, which wasn't too bad considering the engine had seen better days, and so that was quite good. And then I moved on into I went on and did an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And for a company called Cosworth, so that's probably where my sort of real engineering career turned into being a bit more serious. And I think I was lucky in that I happened across Cosworth when I was looking for an apprenticeship. There was a few local organisations that offered them, and this opportunity arose. So there was a year off-site training where I learnt about how to use mills and lathes and all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
But then also as part of that year, we had to do a big project, and we made another Shell mileage marathon car because we were encouraged to do. And we were lucky that we had some apprentices there from Tickford that were making F1 tubs out of carbon fibre and that kind of thing. And they were generous enough to allow us freedom of their carbon fibre shop. So we had a very nice monocoque carbon fibre Shell mileage marathon with our own in-house made engine, and ended up with about, I think that the first year we got about 1,200 miles to the gallon, and then in future years they went on to develop it and ended up with sort of 4,000 or 5,000 miles to the gallon, because it's all about efficiency as the thing's rolling as opposed to when it's actually burning the petrol. So yeah, good grounding and a good project to be done at that time in your career that gives you freedom to kind of learn about those things and take ownership of project work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you started, so when you joined Cosworth, you started to then hem into more mechanical design and development, didn't you?
So again, I was lucky enough that the apprenticeship in the second and third years, we would rotate around different departments. So initially it was a technician apprenticeships. I started doing prototype vehicle builds and engine builds and engine testing, and then was lucky enough to be offered a 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that in the design area. So I was given, I think, 3 days CAD training on Pro E at the time, and was set loose really. And we were lucky at the time that the business was owned by Audi. So just as I joined, it was sold and bought by the Volkswagen Group, and they positioned it in that part of the business, and we were generally working for Audi on the RS products. So believe it or not, as an apprentice, I was working on the cooling pumps for an RS6. It was quite a nice project, and really had the opportunity to work quite autonomously and isolated from the main organisations. We had the benefits of working within a big OEM, but also the agility of a small business. So it was a great time, and lots of people learned an awful lot about engine design and development during that period.
Was it Cosworth then that sponsored your degree at the time?
Yeah, so as I sort of progressed, I did HNC as a part-time, and then was offered the opportunity to do a degree part-time at Coventry. So that was a Friday. I would just disappear off for a day, and they arranged the degree so you could kind of do the modules on half the modules on one day. So it was really well organised.
Great. Then it split into Marler.
Marler took over the business in 2005, which had some pros and cons. And we had then access to lots of in-house IP and stuff for developing components that they'd obviously worked on, and we had the backing of a really large tier one supplier, which was great. And also we weren't affiliated to a particular automaker, which is a consultancy, is a bit of a drawback. So that was quite, again, a good development for the business. Yeah.
So after that point, you then joined Perkins.
During my time at Marler and Cosworth, in general, I was working on, apart from the RS6 stuff, and a few other things. A lot of the work was concept and prototype one-offs, things that would work. We used to specialise in kind of 5-off was a nice project. And I felt as a designer, I needed to develop that kind of feedback loop and understand how good my designs were, and also understand a bit more about production. Ultimately, I had this vision of what a rounded engineer would be, and I thought I needed to get a bit closer to production. So yeah, went in search of that, firstly at Perkins, and then just through personal circumstances moved to Cummins over in Daventry, which was a bit closer to home and allowed me a bit more time at home. So that was a really good opportunity. And Cummins really are very proactive in terms of training. I did Six Sigma training and all sorts of stuff while I was there. Moved across into alternative fuels. So initially I was working on diesel engines, but then we also had natural gas engines. So moved across into that group, was firstly leading the design, and then was offered sort of my first kind of junior management position, team leader position, to look after the natural gas engines, current product natural gas engines. So it's everything from cost, quality, tailoring. So, if somebody wanted a different dipstick or a different oil pan or whatever for their application, that would kind of come into my group. And then also plant support. So it was, quite exciting on a Friday afternoon to get called down and just sort of try and support getting the last engines out of the week or whatever it might be. So yeah, good times.
It's quite an interesting point. So joining Cummins at this time, the technology from automotive that you were ultimately trained on and worked on throughout your career was transferable to obviously your time at Cummins, but then you missed automotive, didn't you?
That's true, and I think I was initially the lure of the big engines, and obviously, as an engineer, when you've worked on sort of automotive stuff, they're all kind of half a litre per cylinder. So the thought of something that's got 3 litres in a cylinder and there's 18 of them is quite exciting. So yeah, that was good for a period of time. But yeah, I kind of like to work on products that put a smile on people's faces, and I kind of missed that thrill of seeing an RSX or some fast car go down the road and thinking that I'd had a hand in making that happen. And even now, when I think back at sort of some of the more interesting projects that I've done, they are those things that I kind of see as you drive around, and you think, oh, actually I can remember sat pondering over that particular feature in that cylinder block, or something like that. Yeah,
and that's one of the beauties about working in the space, isn't it? You actually see your work and it doesn't really go away.
That's it. Yeah, it's that's the sense of achievement you get from engineering, and I think in particular design, which was I think where my interest in design came, was actually having that opportunity to design something, think about it, get it made, and then see what it does. That's kind of a quite fundamental thing.
And then it was a return of the Marler, wasn't it?
So moved back to Marler in 2012, really to get back into automotive, and they'd been successful in developing the business and winning some really interesting projects. And so we had a few interesting things to work on. Yeah, just trying to think back. There was industrialization projects with some Asian OEMs, which was an interesting project to work on, and some opportunity for travel, which is also something that you get with engineering, is that opportunity to go and experience new cultures and see different parts of the world. It's a great career from that point of view as well.
Yeah, and you made a really interesting leap when I spoke to you about Marler. So you pivoted, didn't you? Where you were quite focused on mechanical development, and I think you were chief engineer at the time, weren't you? But then you went into more of the software and control side.
In software, the first opportunity I had to move sort of into a chief engineer role was mechanical development and analysis, which was probably functions that I've been in contact with a design engineer, but never kind of led. So that was a learning curve in itself. And I think I said the other day that it was quite an interesting time, because we were transitioning from ICE, internal combustion engines, across into electrification, and so I was sort of tried to help with that transition and try and find products and services we could offer our customers to help with development of their EVs and hybrid vehicles. And then we had a bit of a restructure as we came out of COVID, and it was clear that at that time I was moving more towards software, and I've always had an interest in software as it is anyway. And so I moved across into looking after our software and controls group, with a view to developing that group and offering more breadth to our customers in that particular area. And then I also took on the project management function within the business. I was looking after the whole portfolio projects and various other responsibilities. Absolutely. So yeah, it was a really interesting time. Lots of training schemes and things, because in general the industry has been transitioning across into new areas, and as a sort of senior leader within the business at the time, I was well involved with that.
And then obviously your current place, it was an interesting startup when you first joined, wasn't it?
So Saietta is a really interesting business. It's was effectively a startup, although it's been in existence for quite a few years. Got some interesting IP and a real desire to put it into production. And I think probably you see it quite often with technology that it has its time, and I think that's where we are now. And so there's an awful lot of interest in the business, and yeah, I'm helping with that transition away from the sort of startup R&D into the production business that we now are effectively. So yeah, it's a really interesting opportunity. It's a very dynamic, fast-moving environment, which is like Cosworth was in the time that I was there originally. And yeah, that's something that's really interesting and a good environment to work in. Lots of opportunity.
And may it continue. If you a little bit of a reflection piece now. If you look back in your career, you've had some good flagship projects. Obviously, some are protected by IP, so it can't be discussed in true detail. But what are you most proud of?
Well, there's something in every day and things that you do. There's always a sense of achievement with engineering, and I think it's important that you do look back on what's happened in the day at times. Maybe it's just 5 minutes on your drive home or whatever, and you think, well, that went well. I'm quite pleased with that, and I think that's an important thing. There's always a sense of achievement. I think, yeah, it's that there are some really pivotal moments, I think, in recent years where we've transitioned away from ICE and mechanical engineering and moving into the software and electronics area, which many companies are having to do, and I think having played my part in that at Marla was that's something that I'm really quite pleased with. And there's quite a few engineers that I can think of that through that process have managed to secure other roles in that new space, people that have been thermodynamics engineers, for example, or test engineers, and they're now working on battery management systems and those sorts of things. That transition and watching people develop and generate new skills and add value in different areas through sort of the influence and coach and encouragement that I've offered is something that I sort of feel a sense of achievement.
Yeah, absolutely, right, and rightly so. I think that it can't be underestimated. I think sometimes we look in the EV space, when you join a startup and they're developing next generation technology, that is excellent. But the transition that Marla have had to do, they're already a mass producer. And then to go through the transition at that level, that is a huge task. It's not an overnight thing, certainly not.
Yeah, it's a fairly big challenge, but the reality is that was going on for a long time before it was kind of out in the open. So there's always been work, and really they've been at the forefront of technology development for a number of years, and quite often the things that are presented in papers and at conferences are many years ahead of where the industry actually needs to be, because as a consultancy, it's important that you're that one page ahead of the book. So yeah, it's an interesting environment.
If you could go back to Simon Duke, now and what you've been what you've experienced so far in your career, if you could go back to Simon at 16 years old, what would you tell yourself?
Go back to when I was 16. I think the first thing was around apprenticeship versus degree. So I was really encouraged by some of the people that I came into contact with at school. One of the technicians at the school was a ex-Royal Ordnance machinist. So he used to make nose cones for missiles and things, and talk to me about carbon shops that no one could go in and this kind of thing. So it's really his encouragement into engineering that really led me to an apprenticeship. And I think they both him and there was another chap who he'd worked with, who I spent some time with, who encouraged me to do an apprenticeship just from a point of view of getting the academic side as well as the practical knowledge that allows you to kind of build background, so that you're never really asking people to do things that you don't actually know the ins and outs of what you're asking for. And so if you want to be a leader, if you want to go on in a career, that's a really good route. there's been times that I thought, a degree may have been an easier way into this industry, because it took me kind of 7 years to get to the point of graduating, which is a long period of time to be spending kind of evenings, weekends, working on projects and keeping enthusiasm for going into the wind tunnel and doing aerodynamics experiments and things like this. But I was fortunate enough to be able to do that, and I spent the time learning. And I think probably it's important that you find your own way. And I think that's one of the key messages, that I was fortunate enough or bold enough, let's say, that I actually took quite a lot of ownership of my path into engineering. When I remember going to the careers advisor at school and was presented with a UCAS form, which is the university application form, and was told that she could help me fill that out, but not a lot else. And so when I said I wanted to do an apprenticeship, that was a bit of an interesting conversation, because that wasn't a very long conversation. So I kind of took ownership of my route, found organisations that could offer the education that I was looking for, and found a role in a business that was of interest to me. And so I think that if I went back, I would just, rather than presume that other people are going to help you too much with your path, you kind of have to take ownership and have to understand where you're going to go. And also, things will change, and you have to kind of roll with those punches and try and find your way. I think the other thing is that you have to say yes to opportunities, especially in engineering. There's an awful lot of different things, and some of them might feel a bit uncomfortable at the time. You might be asked to go and go to a particular country and visit somewhere, and no idea how you're going to get there, who you're going to see, what you're going to find out, etc. But that's kind of the exciting bit. And some of the things that I've actually thought I really would rather not be doing this are some of the experiences that I look back and think, oh, that was actually really good. I learned massively on that particular excursion, or by doing that particular piece of work, or what have you. And I suppose that's one of the things, that you kind of have to embrace those things and not be too choosy about what you do and don't do. That's a really good thing to remember. And then and as I mentioned previously, things go wrong in engineering, and there's been times that there's been errors on things, even they're minor things. And I think probably as engineers, we're all sort of quite perfectionists. And so you can get hung up on those things, but it's important to it's not really about what goes wrong, or, any errors or stuff like that. It's really about what you do about those things and how you find your way through. Because when you look back and projects are completed and the machine or whatever it is that you've been working on is finished and it's working, then all of that stuff's forgotten. And so really you just got to get to that end point as quickly as you possibly can. And so really it's that resilience to failure, and trying to just pick yourself back up and carry on, and fix whatever it is that makes those projects a success. Because if you stop, or anything like that, then you'll never get to that end point. And that's the important thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's quite clear throughout your career, you've worn multiple engineering discipline hats, and you've managed to turn yourself to a lot of different avenues across the sector. One which we touched on briefly was, you're operating at chief engineer level, and you've transitioned in ultimately a completely different technical discipline. Naturally, they have synergies, of course, but that's still a big learning. And I think something we've discussed, isn't it? It's that lifelong learning. It's absolutely key.
Yeah, and that's something I've tried to, and I think it's probably because of my apprenticeship background and having that interest and that sort of trying to do the continuous professional development alongside the projects and the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, that kind of keeps you going and keeps you inquisitive. And most good engineers are very inquisitive people, and so I think moving across into new areas and finding ways to learn about them is a really good skill to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about like online platform learning opportunities and things like that, haven't you?
So one of the really good things that's happened during COVID, believe it or not, is that a lot of the universities recorded their lectures. So a lot of I'm sure a lot of the students that may listen to this will be aware that lectures are recorded and are available online. But there are some really good platforms such as edX that give you access to those university level courses, and also the learning resources that go along with them. So for software, for example, I've managed to sign up for free, believe it or not, to a series of 10 or 2+ hour long lectures in various different aspects of software development. And then alongside that, there are pieces of coursework to complete that are completed in an integrated development environment that's all online. There are scripts to run to check the scripts that you've written, and then you can upload them, submit them, and if you pay a nominal fee, then you can get a certificate at the end of it. And it's a really useful resource, and it's all out there. You just have to go looking. And I think again, that's about taking ownership for your pathway and your learning, and you can find these things, and it's really readily available now.
It's about investing in yourself, isn't it? Actually investing in your own learning is key.
Yeah, the big investment is time, I'll be honest. So it's about thinking that this is a good use of your time. So rather than watching funny cat videos on YouTube or whatever, it's much more interesting to as an engineer to learn about something new. And it's not just restricted to software. There's lots of courses on electric vehicles and other topics that really can help you equip yourself to work in these new areas that are so important as we move forward and away from fossil fuel powered vehicles.
And if we look at the automotive industry now over the next 5-10 years, is there any specific technical trends that you'd either recommend engineers to focus on, or what you feel is coming from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of software and electronics knowledge is going to be needed as we move forward, because obviously all of the vehicles have got a much larger content in that particular area, and it's important not only from the actual operation of the vehicles, but also the development of them. So there's so much development in software and data in particularly to help to speed up development programs, and then also monitor and improve products once they're in the field. And so really that trend to use the data that we're collecting, because we need to monetize it because it doesn't come for free. But finding useful ways of leveraging the data that's collected to improve the product cycle times and things is really important, because we need to evolve the technology so quickly in the next kind of 10-15 years to achieve the targets that have been set to us by legislation to move away from fossil fuels. And that's really, this is about change management and about trying to move us away from, an oil-based transport system into an electrically based transport system.
Absolutely. And we've talked about about the EV solutions that you're part of it now. There's a solution that obviously where you're currently developing. It's quite an interesting one, but there's going to be a lot more diversity in EV tech, isn't there? And that looks at different vehicle applications. And
so I think we spoke about apex predators, did we? So the internal combustion engine has become kind of the apex predator of sort of people transport and light vehicles and things over recent years. As we move away from that, there'll be, in my humble opinion, there'll be some diversity and different applications will be considered. And it's clear that the battery electric vehicles that we've got now are incredible, considering the speed at which they've been developed. And I've got an EV myself at the moment that in the UK, even with the kind of charging network that we have, that there's lots of views on that, which I don't particularly want to comment on, but with the charging network that we have, it's perfectly usable, and I don't even think about it anymore. But clearly, for people that are maybe using sort of heavier duty applications. If you want to go and tow your horse around at the weekend or take a caravan on holiday, or a big roof rack, then perhaps you need, that there needs to be a different solution for those applications. And I think there will be this sort of diversity in powertrains just over the next kind of few years as we find the appropriate solutions for the different applications. And that's one of the interesting bits about this development that we've got going on at the moment.
Absolutely. The final topic that I want to highlight with you mentioned machine learning. That could be a solution to a few things, and that can be linked into developing the speed of development. But what's your views on machine learning coming into our space?
Well, I think it's pretty much inevitable, to be quite honest. I think it depends which level you're really considering. So it's a massive topic. I think, if you talk about artificial intelligence versus machine learning, I think there's a really good phrase that I've heard recently, which is, if it's AI, it's written in PowerPoint, and if it's machine learning, it's probably written in Python. So that's one that I kind of contemplate at times. But again, I think if you think about data and what you're going to need to do with it, our sort of simple human brains can't cope with the amount of data that we've got, but a Python script can. And so I think as we look forward and we sort of operate in that environment where we do have lots of data around us that we need to make the best use of, then machine learning is a really valuable tool to leverage that data and make best use of it.
Absolutely. And then on the topic of self-learning, if anybody wants to get their head into something, Python wouldn't be a too bad a shout.
Not too bad a shout. Yeah, I'm going through a Python course at the moment. I think there's all sorts of stuff. I think there'll always be mechanical engineering, associated with the electronics and the power electronics. But there's so many other fields that are interested in the electromagnetic fields, and the thermal management of the electric devices is another interesting area that people can really look at, get into, and develop knowledge that will be useful for future product development.
Absolutely. And then if we look at the industry as a whole piece, and maybe what's potentially impacting the sector, what's going to cause a change in the sector, it's really on the subject of data, isn't it? We've looked at data again, will be key. You talked to me about digital twin modelling, which was interesting previously, and maybe looking at the use cases for vehicles in the future may change.
Yeah, so I think digital twins are seen as one of these things that will help us with virtual development of vehicles moving forwards, and then also predicting failures and predictive maintenance. So if you get to vehicles, battery vehicles that have maybe got lots of components within them, if you've got a digital twin that is modeling how it's being used, you might be able to predict that at a certain point you need to swap the battery out, swap a particular component out. And that can be done in a preventative way as opposed to somebody breaking down at the side of the road. And that's one of the things that I think our companies, especially if you think about owner models moving forwards and usage models, where if you think of ride hailing and things like this, where people perhaps don't own a car and they rent one and it comes to pick them up, and this kind of thing, that kind of expectation of 100% reliability will get more and more. We've all got iPhones and electronic devices that don't really break down anymore, and I think that will become less and less acceptable to people that want to go somewhere. And so I think digital twins and being able to predict those failures and be able to change out components without the owner even knowing it's happened will be a kind of must for future vehicles, because the people that own the vehicles will want to provide a service that's reliable, and that's really where you need to get to. It's
really interesting part. And then the other thing that we wanted to discuss was looking at sustainability and embedding sustainability within the sector, which is obviously key to everything at the moment.
Yes, I think we said, over the next kind of however 20 25, 30 years, there's an awful lot of development work to be done. And at the moment, we've kind of got some solutions around us, but some perhaps aren't as sustainable as they need to be. And the whole point of moving to electric vehicles is to move us into a sustainable transport economy or something, I should imagine, if there were some big words. So it's really, and that will touch on all aspects of the product life cycle. So that's everything from when you've made it to during its life and how the energy is generated to run it, to at the end of life, what happens to those components? How do we recover the materials out of it? How do we make the next one? And so that sort of sustainability piece is going to become more and more important as we refine the solutions that we've got for our transport needs.
Absolutely. So based on everything we discussed today and reflecting on your career, I suppose from your perspective, why develop a career within this space?
Well, I think it's a really fascinating career. We've touched on quite a few points. As an engineer and someone with an inquisitive mind, engineering is always a very interesting place to be. There's always challenges and things that are there to be achieved. In the next 25, 30 years, there's an awful lot of work to be done. And so there's lots of product development, lots of different applications to be thought about, and lots of products to be developed. And so I can only see sort of growth moving forwards. And then sort of finally, I think it's a great opportunity and a great career to go and see the world and really make a difference to people's lives and try and put smiles on people's faces, I suppose, with the products that you make.
Absolutely, what a great ending message. Absolutely brilliant. Firstly, just thanks for taking the time out to one, share your career. You shared some really, really interesting insights there. And yeah, thanks for taking the time out to join us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been great.
No problem. Thanks, Simon.